All right, folks. Welcome back to a new video series. We're going to do kind of a spin-off topic. This is a good transitionary piece from our series on the lessons that wrestling taught us. We're going to be diving headfirst into leadership. Lots of leadership categories, but we think it's pretty relevant to, like I said, a spin-off from the lessons wrestling taught us, because the summation of most of the things that we were talking about in the wrestling videos was the self-governance that is necessary to become a good wrestler, and how applicable that is into other areas of life. And so we're going to actually dive into self-governance and self-leadership, different strategies by which we both utilize regularly to lead ourselves in our daily lives, so that we can therefore be effective leaders within the workplace and in our families and so on and so forth. So you have an area you want to start?
No, I think the first thing that comes to mind to me is kind of looking at the antithesis of that, of like, if I was to think of, three traits that I would want to embody as a leader, and then maybe we kind of dive into first, what examples have we had of poor leadership? Mm-hmm. And then what has that taught us, right? In our own conquest, you could say, of what leadership should be. I know that I've had plenty of examples of poor leadership, whether that be, on sports teams, to first bosses, to colleagues, peers, etc. So what traits, I guess, would you, maybe the top three in poor leadership that you've seen that maybe discredit the actual leader embodiment that person may think they have, mm-hmm. but aren't maybe taken seriously because of the negative or less than helpful traits that they have?
That's a good one. If I were to summarize it into three character traits, I'd say the first one that's the most pronounced is probably a lack of humility.
Ego.
That's been, I've seen the rise and fall. I've been involved with the rise and fall of one organization and witnessed others. And there's a lot of similarity between the leaders of those organizations. I'm only speaking of one of the two bosses that I had in this category, because I could talk on that all day, the lessons I learned from one of the bosses, but I learned just as many from the other boss, the bad one, which is what we're talking about now. But it was lack of humility and ego. It was very clear that he didn't have all the answers. Right, and he was very clearly was an entrepreneur at heart. He wanted all of this stuff, but he didn't know how to put himself in a vulnerable position with the people he's elected to help him enough to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Right, and it turned into more of, you'll do what I say when I say it, and it turned into an authoritarian, like insecure type mm-hmm. of response. And by the end of their tenure in this business that I'm referring to, he had no followers.
Right.
Everyone wanted to leave, and they wanted to leave on account of this one of the partners. So humility was definitely one thing. Like lack of humility is a trait. So obviously the opposite of that would be a great leader has humility, mm-hmm. right? Additional quirks would be that authoritarianism. I think that a good leader, is that the right word? Authoritarianism? Is that a word? Yeah. So authoritarian, not necessarily, because you need to be an authoritarian. You need to be exacting with your action plans and your sequences and your steps as a leader. But tyrannical authoritarianism is more what I'm getting at there, where it's like they create an environment in which everybody that's still there is only there because of the fear of loss. Right. Right. They're there because they have no other option, so they're therefore seeking other options simultaneously to the work that they're doing, and it automatically brings down the work speed, the investment, the excitement, the culture, so on and so forth. So, tyrannical authoritarianism. When you see those little be this leader, not this leader things on Instagram. You see like the let's go, Captain America, he's out in the field and the troops type of guy. That's a we go scenario, whereas opposed there's like like the Pharaoh in Egypt, and he's being carried by slaves and whipping other ones that are, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm talking about there. Where it's like it's an extremely inefficient way of running a business. Now you can be exacting, and you can demand certain levels of competence and productivity and certain things like that, because it's expected in this operational agreement. But at the same time, these people didn't sign their name on a dotted line saying I'm going to give my life to this country. Right? They're here by will. It's a job, right? So that's one of the other ones. And then I would say, I have a hard time coming up with the third one though. Those are the two bugaboos for me in terms of bad leadership in the past.
Yeah, I think mine, and I think when I say my third, you'll probably be like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But my first one by far is ego, right? Ego, like egomaniacs.
Yeah.
Right. That are closed off to feedback from the people around them, that think that they know everything or the easiest solution to things and are not involved in development with anybody else other than their own brain. Second would be the same. I think that I look at it like I think in the authoritarianism of what you're saying, I think that maybe it's like a dictator.
That's
right?
what I was going for. Yeah.
Because I think that a positive trait in a leader is authority, a sense of authority, but I think it's a diplomatic authority. Right?
And it's an earned authority.
It's an earned authority.
Right.
And then my last one, this might be my first one, but my last one would be leading from the front or leading by example, right? People that don't lead by example, who kind of just bark orders and then don't do everything that they're telling everybody else to do. Or maybe do the same thing, but they take 5-6 shortcuts and do it less efficiently or well.
Yeah. Or they tell you that they can do it much better than you, but never actually show you that. So
Yeah, and you've never seen it.
Yeah.
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 So-
Been around that joker before.
I mean, there's an old saying in the strength world community, and it's like never be coached by somebody that hasn't been stronger than you,
Right.
right? And it's like, I remember my first coach, who was an incredible leader in that specific niche. He was the first dude in the world to squat 1,000 pounds, and I was like, I should probably listen to this guy. He's not the most intelligent guy in the world. He's not the most put together outside of the gym, right? He doesn't have all his ducks in a row. He's not necessarily a person that I would want to embody completely. But in this realm, I need to squeeze every single drop out of this sponge I can, right?
It's a half a ton.
Right.
I'm going to listen. It makes total sense. Yeah.
And he did it 40 pounds lighter than I was at the time, right?
Wow.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
this guy's got some sort of knowledge and experience that I want, right?
Yeah.
But I think on the flip side, the positive attributes, at least that I try to embody myself, is one, leading by example. Two, humility. So humility to me is the ability to say I don't know, right? Or let's find this out together, type answer. And then I think for me, I think the third one that is very important, that I think is very frequently undervalued, is emotional intelligence, or EQ, right? We were having a conversation earlier about Machiavellianism, right? And there's a character trait or a very similar circumstance under most people that operate in a Machiavellian type way, and it's all that they have an extremely high IQ and an extremely low EQ, right? So, but I think that, I mean, there's been some trends of this coming up in the last half decade, maybe decade or so, of the value or importance of EQ. But I think that you can make a much larger and positive impact on people as a leader the more you can relate to them and actually understand what makes them tick rather than try to fit them into your box, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really easy to listen to the guy who somehow remains calm in the midst of a storm.
Right.
Right? It's like people are going to instinctively flock to somebody who can manage their emotions in the midst of what other people are literally losing their mind about. Right? So it's like, okay, I can't figure this out, so I'm going to let my emotions take over, but that guy's got to figure it out. Let's see what he has to say. Right? That's just a natural leader, right? And then as in regards to the humility one, I think that's for me, in terms of really solid leaders and just characters of a leader, that's a lead-in to growth-mindedness, which is a great trait of a leader. Is this, when somebody is humble enough to say, I don't know, and then can follow that up with like, let's figure it out together, that's encouraging the growth of both people professionally as well as the organization as a whole, right? And that's the we go scenario, like the Captain America leading the charge. Let's go into this together. I'm here with you.
Yep.
Right. So, that being said, I think we're pretty in sync when it comes to what we think character traits are of good and bad leaders. So how do we develop these traits?
Yeah. So I think we start kind of the 3 bullet points that I wrote down. Personal goal setting would be the first, second, self-discipline, and third is self-reflection. But I think that personal goal setting for me, this is coming from a guy that has a very plagued brain with ADHD and some dyslexia in there, and probably a few other learning disabilities that I just don't know I have. But
we all got them, don't worry.
Yeah, which, in my opinion, I think if the older I am, the more I realize that I think that they're an asset if you can understand how to utilize them. So it's funny, I was at the doctor with my daughter the other day who also has ADHD, and it's the first time, and she's 8, it's the first time that she kind of asked, like, why do I take this medicine? And the pediatrician responded in such a great way to a kid, which I'm sure she's done thousands of times, but she said, sweetie, your brain just works a little bit faster than most people's, and sometimes this medicine just helps you slow down your brain a little bit. And I said, and I looked at her and I said, but it's a superpower, right? So my ability to hyper focus on something, because there's really 2 types of ADHD. There's a distractive and then there's a hyper focus. I have a hyper focus. I'm glad I don't have distractive ADHD, because that's what I've seen is to be much more paralyzing. But for me, goal setting, I don't necessarily have to focus heavily on large goals, because those goals are easy for me to focus, because it's usually a distant goal. The things that are difficult for me is the small day-to-day goals, right? Of like tasks, things I have to get done, especially things that I don't want to do that I have to get done. So goal setting for me is very simple. I was talking to somebody about this the other day they asked me, like, how do you get these things done when you have all these distractions going on with the ADHD that you have? And I said I use a principle that I was taught when I was 15, and I still use it to this day, where I have a timer that I set for myself. If you were to look at my calendar, you'd see that basically every half hour of my day is partitioned off for something. And I have to put 25 minutes of focused work into something, and I get a 5-minute reward. Whatever that reward may be, right? It could be I stand up and walk around for a little while. Could be I take my dog out on a quick walk.
Brain break, baby.
Right? So goal setting for me, I like to look at micro goals, and the micro goals for me drastically fall into place the macro goals. So if I can complete these micro goals, the small day-to-day things, even things that I don't necessarily want to do, the reward in my brain is that much more enjoyable, right? So we kind of talked about it in the last video that we did on the research that's showing the positive impacts in the brain completing tasks that you don't want to do. And for me now, once I read that study, I was extra motivated to do the shit I don't want to do, right?
It's going to make me better by doing,
Yeah.
mastering the mundane and
Yeah.
doing the small stuff,
Right.
doing it well.
Yeah. So, in the sense of leadership, I think that it's very important to do trial and errors and, you know, beta test things that work for you and things that don't work for you so that you can better handle and or lead people with their struggles and those types of things. Quite frankly, because I think that a lot of people, I don't think the majority of people actually have firm goal setting, right? But for me, those goals, like I said, I've got, you know, life goals. I've got things I want to do in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But most of my goals and goal setting is day to day, week to week. So
Yeah. So I mean that visually that looks like, you know, where the summit is on the mountain, and we've just got to focus on how many steps we're going to take each day before we set up our next camp.
right.
For me, the best acronym of the people, every person that's watching or that will or is watching this video right now has probably heard of the SMART acronym. And I think that's the smartest, pun intended, way of goal setting, period. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, the first thing of the SMART acronym is specific. The goal has to be specific, right? Because that's what most people's problem is when it goes setting goals, is that it's too vague. We do this every time we do a goal planning session in the office. I'm like, that's too vague. It's too vague. Tell me the milestones. Tell me the measurables. Tell me the other stuff, right? Because it's people. You know, like if you want to be the theologian, if you go back to the wrestling videos that we put out, it's like, it's not just like you got a title. That's the goal. I want a title of the theologian. I want to be undefeated, right? It's like, I want to see from the podium of the Olympics the crowd and the flashing lights, and I want, you know, right, there's true description to it because you're visualizing it and you're feeling it, right? So like this SMART acronym, I think for me has always been my best tool in terms of providing action plans of how my days and my weeks and my months and my years are going to be spent. Because if it's too vague, you get lost in the minutia. If it's specific, you can stay focused and dialed in, horse blinders on what it is that you want. Then there's the other parts. It's measurable, right? I like if I want to achieve a goal, and this is stuff that I try to indoctrinate into the things that we utilize here at Pride, is like, there has to be milestones, right? Like, everybody wants this far out goal. Like, one person it's a billionaire, one person it's a family of 5, one person is this, one person is this, but there's milestones to getting to each one of these things, and those are measurable. If you really break it down into like key performance indicators, you can truly test how far along you are, and you can see if it's on your timeline. Is it accurate? Is it realistic? Is it something that you actually can achieve without there being, overwhelming, outside forces that get you there? Is there a timeline? Do you have a true timeline to this, or is it just a thought? Because if it's just a thought, then it's nothing more than a dream. It's not a goal, right? So I think leaders by nature not only know what their goal is and the specific goal that it is, but they're so dialed into it that their focus and their intent on making it that direction is naturally going to pull people into that same current that they're moving through.
Hyper-focus.
Oh, yeah.
So for the people that are watching that don't know the SMART acronym.
Specific, measurable, accurate. Is it accurate? Why am I thinking that sounds funky. Realistic and timely, right? So if you can, dial it in and you have this specific goal, that has milestones and measurable performance indicators. I can't remember why accurate is in there now that I'm
Could be
drawing a blank.
actionable.
Actionable. I'm drawing a blank on this thing right now. I sound dumb bringing it up here when I can't say it. Realistic, well, that one's very powerful because you have to understand what your capacity is as a person, and it maybe it's not realistic now, but on the timeline that you set, is it realistic? And then do you have the measurable things in between the milestones and then timeline, right? So there you go.
So in regard to discipline, I think they go hand in hand, right? In order to achieve goals, you need discipline.
Yeah, you have to be very self-regulated.
Right. So I look at, and you look at guys like Jocko, right, who writes a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. I think discipline gets a bad rap. I think that people who are ultra disciplined, and I would say that I'm probably, if I was to compare myself to one of my close friends who was a SEAL, who still is a SEAL, Rob, I would say that I'm 70% of his discipline. But I have a pretty good barometer of self-discipline in a lot of areas of my life. But I think that discipline is the purest form of self-love, right? It's not pretty, right? But if you can condition your mind to do the shit that you don't want to do consistently, in my opinion, that's what discipline is. It's doing the things that you don't want to do that are not necessarily the most enjoyable, and then holding yourself accountable if you don't.
Well, you brought up the give a shit-a-meter in the last video. I think that when you talk about discipline and self-regulation, I think the reason you think that that's correlated to self-love is specifically that you give a shit about yourself, right? A governed person, a person with goals and discipline to achieve those goals, they think highly of themselves. They think that they are capable. They feel like they are, if not gifted, they have the ability to be gifted in certain areas. They trust themselves to be, something more than what they were yesterday, and they're willing to put in the work for it because they love themselves, right? People who lose, track of who they are in the wilderness or the chaos of life, they're goalless. They become like a soulless figure, right? They're just kind of floating around like Katy Perry, right? The plastic bag floating through the wind, right? It's like people without that self-love don't generally set big goals because they don't believe that they can get there.
I have this thing that there was a video that Rob Dyrdek put out on Instagram a few weeks ago that I just chuckled at because it's something I've done every year for, I think, since I was 16. And I have the same routine every year at the beginning of the year as I go to Barnes & Noble, or back when there were more bookstores open, I would go to bookstores, I'd buy a bunch of magazines, and I make vision boards, right? And I do it religiously. And
I got my vision board from 2024 sitting in my office right
Yep. So I do like this, big poster board that's got all these things on it that, and it's in front of my face every day, right? I put it in a place in my house that I see it every day. And everything on that board requires a pretty tremendous amount of discipline, right? In order for me to, and there's all kinds of stuff in there, things that I want to develop in my character, objects I want, financial goals I want to hit, whatever that may be. But I think that discipline in general, or self-discipline, is I think the paradox is in the moment it doesn't feel great, right? But the reward is always, in my opinion, a greater sense of self-worth, higher self-esteem. You have more confidence in yourself. You are dependable to yourself, which I think is tremendously important. I don't think a lot of people truly feel like they can depend on themselves. So what ways do you hold or carry self-discipline? or do you practice self-discipline?
Ways do I practice self-discipline? I don't know. I guess I don't really think about it. It just kind of is part of who I am.
So how do you? I'll use like just a common form of, in my opinion, a common form of self-discipline. So like for us, one of the things that's very important to us is exercise, right? So like I have a quota of myself a week that I have to walk a minimum of 72,000 steps, which is averages out to a little bit more than 10,000 steps a day, right? In my previous career, that was incredibly easy because I was constantly moving around. At home now, most nights I walk on my treadmill, right? Because it's, I have to be able to reach my goal. If there's a direct correlation to me not doing that and how shitty I feel, right? So in what ways do you, because that interjects with my life in certain circumstances, right? So like maybe, my girlfriend wants to hang out with me and I'm like, I gotta walk, right? Or she's like, hey, let's go do this. And I'm like, we'll do that, but I gotta walk.
Yeah.
Right. Or sometimes it's like, okay, we'll go do that. And then I'm walking at 11:45 at night. Right.
Still got to get it in.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if we're talking about just in general, there's certain things I will and won't allow myself to do based off of what I've achieved throughout the week.
Right.
Right. Like, so if I have made it to the point where I feel like I'm, caught up in terms of like the minutia, the small tasks and stuff that nobody really wants to do, I'll allow myself to stay awake 30 minutes later and watch an actual TV show that I like watching.
Right.
I'll let myself stay up a little bit later, or I'll let myself do certain things. And my days are always very structured and set the same way. I wake up at the same time. I don't allow myself to hit the snooze button. It's like I wake up at this time and I do these things to get my day set, right? And then I drop the kids off, and when I get to the office, I do these things first and I do these things second, and I close these pieces off, and then I prioritize these things from that point forward. So, I'm regulated enough to know how to keep my priorities always a priority and always at the forefront. And if I ever fall behind, then I'll do whatever is necessary to catch myself back up, whether I have to stay up late to do certain things, carry work home with me, work on the weekends, do other things like that. But I know the thing about it is it sounds like, you're flirting with that life balance thing that everybody's always talking about, but I'll absolutely drive myself bonkers, feel awful, and also be a poor parent to my children if I have things that I know I need to have done because I'm preoccupied because I've failed to meet my quota or meet my task or whatever it is.
So in the sense of leadership, how do you teach that?
How do you teach that? Well, the thing that I'm most focused on right now is constantly repeating the same mantras, which is use best practice. Right? It's simple things. Is every single day you have to check the boxes that get your day started to know what is in front of you. Be religious with your calendar. Have time, like what you said, your day's partitioned. Have your calendar set before you so you know what you're getting into on any given day. That way you already know what needs to be done in terms of priorities, and when the chaos and the road bumps and the other things that come with a day, they start to rear their ugly head, because they're going to. You already know which priorities you have to take care of because it was scheduled. It's already set for you, so you can work the other pieces in the pockets of the day, and it never actually throws you off your path. Stuff like that. So using best practices, being efficient towards your life, not overdoing it with the water cooler talk. That's I always lead by example. You're never going to find me for longer than 5 minutes talking about a subject that has nothing to do with business.
Right.
I'll ask you about your life, I'll joke with you, and I'll do certain things, but I'm not sitting there engaging in a conversation for 20 or 30 minutes, because I'm going to set a tone that it's okay to sit around and talk about random things that have nothing to do with the organization and our goals, our uniform goals. You just watch it. It just kind of bleeds into the people around you when you're sitting in a leadership position, right?
So that answer was in my opinion, the answer that I guess you could say I was looking for.
Yeah.
Was that for me, observing the things that I think that I've been fortunate, and I've been like this my whole life. I've always been very much a fly on the wall, and I'm very observant of everything around me, which has protected me in a lot of ways, helped me in a lot of ways. I've seen a very large upswing of what I would consider growth and professionalism and leadership in you since I started here. You're a very different person than you were 3 years ago, right? In a lot of positive ways, right? But I think that one of the things that I'm seeing, and I saw this from day one, but one of the things that I'm seeing more so, I would say that's more comparative to like, you led by example really well when I started here in the field, right? But leading by example in, like what you said, best practices and, you know, the small things, and, you know, how many times have all of us heard statuses, right? And, you know, like all these little things, but these little things, like the discussion that we were having on that account earlier, have drastic repercussions if they're not followed, right? So it's like I hear Travis Mash, my powerlifting coach, in the back of my head, and everything that you're saying right now is master the mundane, master the mundane, master the mundane, master the mundane, right? Just do the simple shit and do the simple shit perfectly, and the rewards are gigantic, right?
I used to say that when I was in the gym industry. There's no dogging on any individual who works out religiously. I'm proud of you for your discipline and that kind of stuff. I've just never been a fan of the bodybuilding culture, for a specific reason. I just don't. It's not me, right?
Right.
But there's when I would sell personal training and you know, or I was working with personal training clients that were part of the gyms that I was running, and we would be talking about goal setting and so on and so forth, or getting somebody back on the wagon when they fell off the wagon and stuff. You know, my response was always the same. I was like, if you put in the hard work, you do this, you put the repetitions in, aesthetics are going to be a byproduct. You don't have to focus on the aesthetics. You have to focus on the repetition.
Right.
Right. And that's kind of what you're talking about. Like if you focus on the small stuff and you do the small stuff exorbitantly well and you never fade from the small stuff, byproduct is going to be success.
Right.
And in the category we're talking about, byproduct is going to be a good leader.
Right.
Right.
Right. So in regard to, which I think that this is the most important, because I think that every successful leader is exceptionally good at self-reflection. So how does that play into governing yourself in your own self-leadership and then displaying that out to the people that you lead?
Well, I'm really hard on myself.
Yep. I was going to say, I mean, both of us are very hypercritical of
I'm
ourselves.
extremely critical. It's hard for me to get myself to pat myself on the back, you know. But it's come with a lot of benefits. It's come with a lot of negatives as well, which is, you know, the imposter syndrome and the other things that are hanging out in the back of my head and whatever. But self-reflection is an extremely powerful tool. And one of the things that I've adopted, and I've taken it more and more seriously, I think probably, you know, you'll see what you said about the changes and the type of lead by example leader I've been for the last 3 years. I've taken more and more and more ownership over the individual things that are going on, right? So like if there's an error that's made, my first instinct, and you could call this narcissistic if you want to, but I'm not mad at the person that made the error. I'm mad at myself for allowing there to be an error within the process that allowed this to happen within the organization. I'm not mad at them, I'm mad at myself, right? So if I take that, self-reflect and sit and kind of chew on it for a little while, I can let myself see far enough back into the mechanism where this could have been the origin of this problem. And it allows me to think before, A, I emotionally respond to this person, and B, it allows me to target where the problem's actually coming from rather than, you know, where it reared its ugly head. So it's an extremely powerful tool because it allows this person that you're working with to understand, hey, I'm in an area where I'm not going to get raked over the coals
Right.
for every mistake that I'm making, and we're going to work on this problem together, and we're going to be better because of it. It's a different culture altogether. You know?
So I think I don't think there's a fraction of narcissism in that. I mean, I think narcissism really is like an unhealthy obsession with self, and very, very rarely, if ever, has any positive connotation, right?
Yeah. Well, what I'm really meaning by that is like I'm making it seem as though I'm the center of this pride universe, that I live inside of all the time. But it allows me, if I'm thinking, where did I go wrong in setting up the blueprint of this organization? Like, where was the error in the blueprint? Not where was the error with this one person who's taking care of peace inside the blueprint. So it is a little bit self-centered in terms of the thought, where did I go wrong, rather than where did you go wrong? But I get what you're saying.
Well, I think I would look at the narcissism as somebody that would be very quick to take credit for successes and slow to take any credit for detriments, right, or downfalls. I think that having an awareness that you have a role in the origin of something, right, is healthy, right? I think that, in fact, I think if you don't possess that trait, then I don't think you'll ever be a good leader, right? Because there's some part of, I was having a conversation in the meeting earlier with some of the sales guys, and in my head, I literally had a question, and I was like, where did I go wrong here? Right? Like, why is this?
Well, your salespeople are a reflection of you.
Right.
I mean, and I try to get people to understand, not to cut you off, but I try to get people to think from that same perspective.
Right.
It's like our subs are performing terribly. They're not showing up on time. They're not checking in. They're doing whatever. But your subs, even though they're not a part of the organization, are a reflection of what you've set your expectations with them to be. Right. So, like, take some ownership over that. Right?
Yeah. So I think that, and I'll kind of play into the self-reflection thing for me is 100% always kind of roots itself in the principles I've learned in recovery, which are technically biblical principles, right? But I do it daily, and it's, part of people that live in a lifestyle that are in recovery, that are practicing recovery, which I think is very different than just being in recovery. But practicing is like, every day I do a daily inventory, right? And the daily inventory is very much just about me. And it's more so of like, where could I have been better in these circumstances, right? So, and where do I owe an amends, or where do I need to make things right, or where do I need to speak up when I need to speak up, or whatever that may be. So, but I think that a lot of my self-reflection, which is kind of disassociated from the business, but I think has a lot to do with the principles in which I lead, is they're very grounded in the principles that I've learned in recovery and the principles that I've learned living a spiritually centered life, right? And it's like, most of my self-reflection is time I spent with myself, or time I spend with myself and God, right? And it's like, in every aspect of my life, I probably could have been a little bit more patient there with my daughter, right? Or I could have been, maybe my response could have been a little less dismissive there when that employee asked me for help on something, right? Or maybe I could have been a little more open-minded to their lack of experience comparative to my wealth of experience, to their 3 months to my years, right? And then how can I be more receptive to that next time, right?
Well, do you tackle that immediately, or do you tackle that in general, like this is what I commit to in general when I'm in these scenarios?
So there's a word that is very ever present in the world of recovery, and it's the word prompt, right? And it's that if we notice something that we have to take action on, we have to take action promptly, right? Because my brain will make excuses naturally. It's like, I'll do it next time, right? But instead, it's like, I had a conversation with one of the employees probably a month and a half ago, and it was, I opened the conversation with, I understand that I came off this way. Can I describe what my intention was, and then I'll adjust the way that I approach you next time, because what I'm gathering is that the way that I approached you wasn't the way that you were most receptive, right? And in turn, you felt this, right? When I meant to make you feel this, right? So in most circumstances, it's relatively prompt, right? Like, I should do this, and I'm going to do it now. In some circumstances, usually the ones that challenge my character the most, or make me the most uncomfortable, are the ones that I have to get out of the way first, right?
That's been the reason I asked that is because leading the answer is that's one of the things I've forcefully had to adopt to become better as a leader in this organization, as well as a leader of my family. And that type of stuff is addressing things regardless of the consequence or how uncomfortable they are instantly, because if you don't, you leave that gap. That's really where the friction and the problems start to
resentment builds.
Perceptions are created, stuff like that, and then you're leaving room for the devil to sink in. It's kind of like a facetious, I don't know if that's the right word, but a weird way to say that, but it really is. The evil or the dark creeps into that once good and positive relationship. And tackling it on the head it's an exercise of the other character traits. It's the exercise of humility.
Right.
It's the exercise of let's build a little bit better, the growth mindset. Let's find a better way to communicate with each other in the future so that I can avoid this uncomfortability, for one. And for two, I never treat you differently than you should be treated.
Right.
Stuff like that. So.
Well, for me, it's like, I don't know if you remember this. This is maybe a year ago or so that I told you kind of one of the more impactful things that I was taught when it came to discipline in the work setting, tasks, self-reflection, etc., is that the first thing that I have to do every day is the thing that I've been pushing off, or the thing I want to do the least. Right? And inversely, right, or conversely, I should say, the sense of freedom after that is like, because we usually make a mountain out of a molehill, right? And it's like, I really wouldn't want to do that. Putting that off.
Well, even if it was a true mountain, there wasn't a molehill. Like you tackle that at the beginning of the day, it's like you've got the world at your fingertips for the rest of the day. It's like nothing is going to be that uncomfortable or stressful or hard.
Right.
So that is something that I have not forcefully. I've externally, I've forced myself to start doing that, because I've realized that's one of the biggest errors in myself. I'm naturally, I kind of just want to avoid things, right? That's the way I've been my whole life. I just want to avoid conflict, but I'm learning that there's a difference between being a peacemaker and a peacekeeper.
Right.
Right? Sometimes peacemaking requires some violence or some friction. I say when you get violent in a workplace, I'm just saying, like, sometimes you've got to put your foot down, and it might be against yourself.
Right. Totally. And in my opinion, most frequently it's usually against yourself.
99% of the time. Yeah.
So I think that you led this one. I think the next one I think would be great, and I think it would be very relatable for a lot of people. Is I think maybe next video we go into imposter syndrome, because I've done an unhealthy amount of studying on imposter syndrome. Yeah. And it's
I've done an unhealthy amount of feeling like an imposter.
I've done an unhealthy amount of impostering.
Yeah.
But I think that leads heavily, because I think that I think that most leaders are often the most self-critical, and usually feel like they're in the wrong position. And I think that coincides fairly well with the sense of humility. But I think that that's a sense of humility taken a little too far. Right?
Yeah, it could be double-edged sword.
Right.
Yep.
So we say we wrap this one up, and then next week we go into imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining into our conversation about, self-governance, and maybe apply a couple of those things. I'm definitely going to reflect on this one, right? And we'll see you on the next one.